But first, let's talk about these by-elections. And in the studio, a warm welcome to the political columnist at The Sun, a Westminster veteran, if ever there was one, Trevor Kavanagh. Hello, Trevor.
Hi there, Kevin.
Well, your take on last night's events. I mean, we were told this could be a sort of triple triumph for Labour, although they never stood much chance in the West Country, but they certainly had high hopes of taking Boris's constituency of Uxbridge and Ruislip, and guess what, they didn't. So Keir Starmer, not a happy camper this morning, and particularly unhappy, I would have thought, with the London Mayor Sadiq Khan. Explain why.
Well, interestingly, it should have been three defeats for the Tories and only 2 victories for Labour, because the Lib Dems were nailed on down in Somerset. But the loss of, or the failure to win in Uxbridge is really a bigger blow than it looks even at first sight, because, I mean, the voters in Uxbridge were pretty unhappy with the fact that their Boris Johnson, that he had been summarily dismissed, run out of town, so to speak. So there was already...
They voted for him, you know.
They voted for him, and they were pretty unhappy about the fact that he had been bumped off. So you had that aspect for one thing, which would have theoretically supported Labour's attempt to win. But the really big thing here is ULEZ and the £12 bill for coming into town for an awful lot of motorists, for whom £12 is a lot of their disposable post-tax income. I mean, these are people who can't afford to get a new car, which will come within the limits for ultra-low emissions. They are our readers and your viewers. They're people who, if they don't live within the congestion zone inner area, like the City of London, they have to pay £27.50 to come into town every single day. So, you know, that is very unpopular, but it's only the tip of the iceberg. It's the cancel culture, it's the net zero, it's the trans rights, it's the fact that people are being gagged and basically told not to say things or even to think things that don't comply with the left-wing view of the world. And
of course, ULEZ, as you quite rightly imply, is all part and parcel of Labour's green obsession. And Keir Starmer may not be the most brilliant politician of all time, but even he can work out, well, if you're saying to potential voters, by the way, we've got this brilliant scheme, it's going to cost you £27.50 every time you get in your car, but that's going to save the environment. And by the way, we're also going to put massive, great green levies onto your energy bills because we're going to save the planet. People always say, oh, yes, of course I want to save the planet. Do you want to save the planet if it's going to cost you thousands of pounds more every year? Do you want to save the planet if it means you can't go to Spain on holiday, you can't drive a petrol car, etc., etc.? Once they find out that this green dream that politicians in Westminster seem to feel we're all right foursquare behind, once they find out it's going to cost us a fortune, people change their minds. This green dream that Westminster think is such a vote winner is not. Ask the Green Party, who've hardly ever won a single vote in their lives.
Well, I think that the art of the politician is to get ahead of the curve. And we all know where the curve is going, which is, as you say, that the public are very fed up with the way that the motorist in particular is just being picked on as a revenue cash cow.
Yes.
Driving offences which you don't even know you're committing half the time, and suddenly you find a letter.
Tell me about it. I've just paid my 3rd speeding fine of 2 months.
Me too. Yeah. I mean, it's a shocking thing. Just a few miles over the limit and the camera will snap you and you're getting a bill, and if you don't pay quickly, it's double the price. So, but the problem here is that Keir Starmer can rage all he likes about the failure of Mayor Khan to abandon the ULEZ, but he actually supports it. He's only not supporting it in theory and on paper simply because he knows it's going to cost him votes, which it's just done. Yeah. But the other problem is that Rishi Sunak and the Tories also support it. Not necessarily ULEZ, but they do net zero and all the green
claptrap. Yeah, green claptrap, green crap, as David Cameron accurately described it. It is strange, isn't it, the way the body politic seems to be so far away from what most people in this country think. I guess not only on green issues, but on so many other issues as well.
Well, it is, and what is so infuriating is that you know eventually someone, somewhere, one party or another is going to have to do something about it, Why don't they do it now? I mean, the fact that teachers can conceal from parents the fact that their children are trying to
beggars belief, doesn't it?
It beggars belief. And the same applies to all the other measures that are being introduced behind the backs of people who have no say, not only no say, but no knowledge, as indeed with the Coutts Bank decision.
Great story in your paper today in The Sun by your colleague Natasha Clark. Remainers, Labour voters, old and young, all back the government's migration policy. They all back the Rwanda scheme. So there again, Keir Starmer not understanding his own support group, I would suggest.
No, and encouraged, it seems, by Tony Blair, who parades himself as the great election winner of all time. His era was gone. It doesn't exist anymore. He's the one who opened the door to mass immigration and mass illegal immigration as well. And now we're seeing the benefits and the fruits of all of that, and all of the parties are frantically scrambling to shut the doors without trying to look mean in the process. It's impossible. Once you start to say you cannot come into the country, you will find howls of protests from shroud-waving, well-meaning, perhaps, agitators who will do everything possible, legally and illegally, to stop you getting your policy through.
It's extraordinary. With this by-election result situation that we're looking at now, Rishi Sunak, and I think he's got a point, he said the result in Uxbridge shows that there is still all to play for, that the Tories actually, we may end up with a similar situation. You'll remember this, even though I was only about 3 years old at the time. I can remember when the entire nation was convinced, we knew that Neil Kinnock was going to be the next Prime Minister. It was exactly the same mood in the nation then as there is now. Oh, it's inevitable. Tories can't win. Guess what? They did. Neil Kinnock never did win that election. And, of course, The Sun brilliantly said of him, if he did win, will the last person in Britain please turn the lights out? That was on the day of the election, and it was seen as the key moment in his defeat. Rishi's got a point, hasn't he? And let me add an adjunct to this question, a very terrifying one. If the Tories don't win, given these results, given that the Lib Dems did well in the West Country, Tories did OK up in the North, could we be heading, horror of horrors, for a Lib coalition government?
Well, I think that's probably the best that Keir Starmer can look forward to, frankly. I mean, you were talking about watching this Kinnock debacle when you were 3 years old, and of course, I'm 10 years older.
I was actually a bit older than that. Yeah, you're in your early 20s.
I was in my early 20s as political editor, and I can remember vividly that the whole of the country were convinced that Kinnock was going to win, and the polls were allegedly showing it too. And he himself, on the very night of the election, was shouting, "We've won." And then on the election day, or the eve of the election, I remember getting a call in the parliamentary press gallery saying they're pouring their troops out, it's taken the troops out of safe Labour seats, pouring them into the marginals to try and rescue themselves. And on the day, John Major won the biggest turnout, the biggest vote in history.
So Rishi's got a point.
I think Rishi has got a point, and I'm saying this to myself in the paper tomorrow, that these by-elections have proved, first of all, that Keir Starmer has yet to win the trust of the British people, and secondly, that the Tories still have a lot to play for. They might not win, they could, if they do the right things. This Uxbridge by-election taught us a lot about the way ordinary people are thinking about the sort of issues that affect their daily lives. It's up to the Tories to do something about it.
So it seems hard an unlikely thing to say, but there'll be a better move in Tory HQ, better mood today in Tory HQ, and the champagne socialist corks will not be popping.
No, I think that an awful lot of... I mean, I was talking to various people before the by-elections, and they all said that if Keir Starmer doesn't win Uxbridge, it's a bad blow for the Labour Party. And I think that what we're seeing over the coming months, when inflation begins to fall in a serious way, when the growth begins to show through, when a whole raft of other issues that he's promised, such as the Rwanda boats, begin to come through, or at least that he's shown to be fighting for it, we're going to see a difference in the polling. I think we're going to see a slide in Labour's support, and maybe quite a big slide as we get into the campaign itself.
Can I direct you towards our state broadcaster, the BBC? I call it the state broadcaster because they hate being called the state broadcaster, and anything that annoys the BBC is good enough for me. Why are they lying to the nation? Why has Simon Jack, the business editor, not corrected or apologised for his story, stating definitively that the reason Nigel Farage's bank accounts were closed down by the alleged Top People's Bank Coots was purely financial, that he didn't have enough money. They actually do not have a financial threshold, which he should have known as the business editor, but he said they did, and he no longer met it. We have subsequently learned 100% that is not true. The truth is, they did close him down because the staff don't like his political opinions, and such a storm that has caused that the boss of NatWest, which owns Coots, Dame Alison Rose, has written a grovelling letter of apology to Nigel Farage, saying that this shouldn't have happened, offering him new banking facilities. The BBC, I think it was 2 days, shortly after Farage said he was getting closed down for political reasons, the BBC triumphantly told us that's not true. Their story, heinously wrong, utter nonsense. No apology, no correction. The only thing that Simon Jack has done, he did it today, under pressure, has tweeted, well, there's nothing wrong with the story, I just should have said a source told the BBC. So I tweeted him and said, so does this mean that all journalists, particularly at the BBC, can just print whatever they want as long as you say a source told me? Particularly a source told the BBC. That doesn't exonerate the story. He should apologise. What is the BBC doing now? Just giving us They've got a disinformation correspondent. Her name is Mariana Spring. I would suggest that Simon Jack's story is one for Mariana.
The verification correspondent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Martin Bashir, and through the Operation Midland, the raid on Cliff Richard's home, and so on, in abundant numbers. And I think that the BBC will be forced eventually, I'm talking about Simon Jack, to apologise for that story. The idea that you simply say, well, a source told us, that's not an escape that would be accepted by any newspaper regulator, and it shouldn't be by Ofcom either. I'm told all sorts of things, but I wouldn't put them in the paper under any label. So I think that they've got a big responsibility, but that doesn't let Dame Alison Rose, for some reason, off the hook either. That apology that she's issued is full of loopholes.
Yes, it is.
And especially the idea, for instance, that this is not the way we operate, this is against our policy. It is absolutely in line with the declared policy on paper that we didn't know about until Nigel Farage got hold of the documentation of Coots Bank and NatWest, its owner. So, I mean, you've got I think this is more sinister even than it looks, bigger even than Nigel Farage, because this is a policy, a view, a world view that spreads right across commerce, right across banking, right across Whitehall. This is the blob in miniature, but it's the blob also writ large.
And a lot of the left have been saying, oh, what, this is just Nigel Farage. I mean, literally, they've been all over Twitter going, name me one other person who's had their bank account cancelled for political reasons like Nigel Farage. Guess what? There's a Facebook group. There are more than 10,000 people in it who have all had their bank accounts cancelled by NatWest or Coots. So there you go. You want anybody else who's been cancelled? There are more than 9,999 more than just Nigel Farage. This is a scourge. These people's bank accounts are being cancelled because the NatWest doesn't like what they think. It doesn't like their opinions. That is an affront to free speech, and I hope the government cracks down on these banks very, very soon. They damn well better.